Commander Park Jin-woo felt his boots hit the metal floor of Galactic Station Delta 9 with a soft thud. The massive space station stretched out before him like a small city floating in the darkness of space. Lights blinked everywhere, and the hair hummed with the sound of alien technology he couldn't even begin to understand. Behind him, a small brown and white dog trotted along, his tail wagging slightly as he took in all the new smells. This was Bori, Jin-woo's faithful companion, for the past 5 years. The dog had been with him through countless missions, but nothing quite like this diplomatic summit, with 12 different alien species. As soon as they entered the main reception area, Jin-woo noticed the stairs. Dozens of alien eyes turned toward them, but they weren't looking at him. They were all focused on Bori, who was busy sniffing an interesting spot on the floor near a tall plant. The Nexari delegates were the first to react. These tall, thin creatures stood nearly 8 feet high, with 4 long arms that moved like tree branches in the wind. Their leader pointed all 4 arms at Bori and started making rapid clicking sounds that Jin-woo's translator couldn't quite pick up. But he didn't need a translator to understand they were laughing. More aliens joined in. The short, stocky Keth with their lizard-like skin began hissing in what Jin-woo assumed was amusement. Even the floating jellyfish-like Vex started pulsing their bodies in rhythmic patterns that looked suspiciously like laughter. Jin-woo felt his cheeks grow warm with embarrassment, but he kept his face calm. He had been warned this might happen. Earth was still new to the galactic community, and many alien species found human customs strange. But bringing Bori hadn't been his choice alone. The dog was part of his official security detail, though he couldn't explain that to anyone yet. Bori seemed completely unbothered by all the attention. He finished investigating the plant and padded over to sit beside Jin-woo's leg, his pink tongue hanging out slightly as he panted from the walk. To the aliens, he probably looked like nothing more than a lazy pet who served no purpose. A tall Nexari approached them, its 4 eyes blinking in sequence. Through the universal translator, its voice came out smooth and curious. Human delegate, we are puzzled by your choice of companion. Does this creature serve some ceremonial purpose we do not understand? Jin-woo smiled politely. Bori is my partner. He goes where I go. This seemed to amuse the Nexari even more. It clicked rapidly to its companions, who all swayed their long necks in what looked like alien head-shaking. Partner? But it appears to do nothing but breathe and shed fur on your clean floor. More aliens gathered around now, drawn by the conversation. Jin-woo could feel their curiosity mixed with something that felt uncomfortably like pity. They looked at him, the way someone might look at a child carrying around a broken toy they refuse to throw away. Perhaps humans have not yet learned to create proper synthetic companions, suggested a Keth with particularly bright green scales. We could share our biotechnology with your species. Jin-woo just nodded and thanked them for their kind offer. He picked up his travel bag and gently patted his leg. Come on, Bori, let's find our room. The dog immediately stood and followed, completely ignoring the crowd of aliens still staring at them both. The grand ceremonial hall of Galactic Station Delta 9 was unlike anything Ambassador Kim Nari had ever seen. The ceiling stretched up, so high it seemed to disappear into darkness, while holographic displays showed the flags and symbols of 12 different alien civilizations. Soft music that sounded like wind chimes mixed with whale songs filled the air. Nari took her seat at the human delegation table, smoothing down her dark blue diplomatic uniform. She had spent months preparing for this moment, studying alien customs and practicing her speeches. This summit could change everything for Earth's future in the galaxy. Bori settled down beside her chair with a soft thud, his furry body hitting the floor as he made himself comfortable. The dog let out a small sigh and rested his head on his paws, brown eyes scanning the room with mild interest before closing halfway. Almost immediately, Nari heard the whispers start. At the table to her left, 3 Keith delegates leaned toward each other, their scaly heads nearly touching. These reptilian creatures reminded Nari of the monitor lizards she had seen in nature documentaries, but much larger and wearing elegant robes. Their forked tongues flicked out as they spoke in low hisses that their translators picked up. Look at the humans, creature. one of them said, its voice coming through as a dry whisper. "It does nothing but occupy space and consume oxygen." Another, Keth, nodded, its yellow eyes fixed on Bori. "Our information about humans must be incorrect. We were told they were intelligent, but this suggests otherwise." The third Keth made a sound like steam escaping from a kettle, which Nari realized was probably laughter. "Perhaps they believe keeping useless animals makes them appear more civilized." Behind them, the Vex delegation was even less subtle. These insect-like beings stood nearly 7 feet tall, with multiple arms and wings that caught the light like oil on water. They communicated through a combination of buzzing sounds and rapid wing movements that created different patterns in the air. One Vex gestured toward Bori with 2 of its 6 arms, creating a buzzing sound that the translator rendered as mockery. "The human brings a broken symbiont to a diplomatic gathering. How embarrassing for their entire species." Its companion's wings fluttered in what looked like agreement. "We should offer to replace it with something more suitable, perhaps a proper work drone or a cleaning organism." Nari felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. She had been trained for this. Diplomats couldn't show anger or offense, no matter what was said. But it was hard to listen to them talk about Bori like he was some kind of mistake. The dog in question seemed completely unbothered by all the attention. He yawned widely, showing his pink tongue and white teeth, then shifted to a more comfortable position. His tail gave a lazy wag when Nari's hand briefly touched his head. More aliens joined the conversation as the ceremony preparations continued. The tall, graceful Nexari clicked their approval of the criticism, while even the usually polite Axiom delegates began making subtle comments about human attachment to non-functional biologics. Nari noticed that every time Bori moved, even just to scratch behind his ear or adjust his position, the alien chatter would increase. They seemed fascinated by what they saw as his complete uselessness. What none of them realized was that Bori was actually working. His ears twitched at every sound, his nose constantly analyzed the air, and his eyes, though appearing sleepy, tracked every movement in the room. He was doing exactly what he had been trained to do, but the aliens couldn't recognize it. They saw only a lazy pet, not the highly trained security partner he actually was. Dr. Lee Dong-min rubbed his temples as he tried to concentrate on the holographic display showing advanced fusion reactor designs. The Axiom scientist was explaining how their civilization had solved energy problems that still plagued Earth. But every few minutes, another burst of alien laughter would break his focus. The morning's scientific exchange had started well enough. Representatives from different species were sharing their greatest technological achievements, and Dong-min had been taking careful notes. This information could advance human science by decades, maybe centuries, but it was becoming impossible to focus with all the commentary about Bori. At the front of the room, Ambassador Yoon So-young stood perfectly straight, her hands clasped behind her back as she listened to the presentations. Her face showed nothing but polite interest, even when the Nexari delegate gestured toward Bori and made another comment that had the entire alien section clicking with amusement. Perhaps the humans could explain the scientific purpose of their mobile fur-shedding device, the Nexari said, its forearms moving in exaggerated gestures. "We are curious about this biological anomaly they have brought to our technical discussions." Yoon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady and professional. "Bori serves multiple functions that may not be immediately apparent to other species," she replied smoothly. This seemed to delight the aliens even more. A Keth delegate hissed what sounded like laughter. "Multiple functions. We observe only sleeping, eating, and the production of organic waste. Truly revolutionary technology." Bori, completely unaware that he was the center of attention, had found a patch of warm light streaming through one of the station's massive windows. He circled 3 times, then settled down with a contented sigh, his fur catching the artificial sunshine. Within minutes, soft snoring sounds filled the quiet moments between presentations. The Vex delegation started buzzing excitedly among themselves. Through their translators, Dong-min caught fragments of their conversation. "Energy inefficient, serves no purpose, human ignorance of proper biological design." One of the younger Nexari scientists raised two of its four hands to get attention. "We have a theory about the human creature," it announced. "Perhaps it is not a companion at all, but rather a parasite that has convinced humans it is beneficial through some form of mind control." The suggestion sent waves of clicking, hissing, and buzzing through the alien delegations. They found this idea absolutely hilarious. "That would explain human attachment to such an obviously useless organism," agreed a Keth elder, its scaled head nodding sagely. Dongmin felt his face growing hot. He glanced at Yun, who maintained her diplomatic smile, even as her knuckles went white, where her hands gripped each other behind her back. As the day progressed, the jokes became bolder and more frequent. During a presentation on agricultural advances, a VEX delegate suggested that humans might benefit from learning to farm properly instead of wasting resources on biological decorations. During a discussion of space exploration, a Nexari wondered, "Allowed if humans brought their parasites on long journeys to other worlds?" Bori remained blissfully unaware of it all. He had moved from his sunny spot to investigate an interesting smell near the refreshment station. His nose worked overtime, cataloguing every scent in the room. To the aliens it looked like random wandering. To anyone who knew dogs, it was clear. He was systematically gathering information about everyone present. The worst moment came during the afternoon break. A group of younger aliens had gathered around Bori, who was lying peacefully near Dongmin's chair. They started pointing and making observations as if he were some kind of museum exhibit. "Look how it just lies there," one Vex buzzed. "No useful output, no productive activity. How do humans justify the resource expenditure?" Dongmin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sudden movement caught everyone's attention, including Bori, who opened one eye to check on his human before closing it again. "Perhaps," Dongmin said carefully, "some things have value that isn't immediately obvious." The aliens exchanged looks that clearly said they thought he was delusional too. The second day of the summit started badly and only got worse. Captain Han Minho arrived at the tactical briefing room early, hoping to review the morning's agenda before the other delegates arrived. He needed to understand the alien military technologies being discussed today, especially their defensive systems and security protocols. Bori trotted beside him, his claws clicking softly on the metal floor. The dog seemed more alert today, his head turning slightly at sounds that Minho couldn't even hear. But when they entered the briefing room, Bori simply found his usual spot near Minho's chair and settled down for what looked like another long nap. The Keth military advisor, General Sektar, was already present when they arrived. This particular Keth was larger than the others Minho had met, with darker green scales and scars across his snout that spoke of real combat experience. His yellow eyes tracked Bori's movement across the room with obvious disdain. "Ah, the human brings his security blanket again," Sektar said loudly enough for everyone to hear. His translator rendered the hissing sounds as contemptuous laughter. "Tell me, Captain, does your creature provide tactical analysis, or does it simply make you feel less alone?" Minho felt his face flush, but kept his voice level. "Bori is part of my team, General." "Your team?" Sektar's scaled head tilted in what might have been confusion or amusement. "Does it carry weapons, analyze threats, communicate intelligence, or does it simply consume rations and produce waste?" Before Minho could respond, other delegates began filing into the room. The Vex military representative, Commander Zekth, immediately noticed the conversation and joined in with rapid wing movements that translated as mocking, chittering sounds. "We were just discussing the human's unusual military asset," Sektar explained to the newcomer. "Perhaps you could help us understand its tactical value." Commander Zekth's compound eyes focused on Bori, who was now lying on his side with his eyes closed. The dog's chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of sleep, though one ear occasionally twitched at distant sounds. "I see no weapons systems," the Vex commander observed. "No armor plating, no communication devices, no apparent sensory enhancement beyond basic biological parameters. Its wings buzzed in what sounded like electronic laughter. Perhaps it serves as a distraction for enemies? They become confused by its purposelessness?" The joke spread quickly through the room as more delegates arrived. Even species that had been relatively polite before began joining in the mockery. The usually dignified Axiom representatives started making subtle comments about inefficient resource allocation in human military doctrine. Engineer Song Hye-jin, who had been quietly setting up her presentation equipment, paused to watch Bori more carefully than the others. While the aliens continued their jokes, she noticed things they missed entirely. The dog's ear movements weren't random, they tracked specific sounds around the room. His breathing pattern changed slightly when certain delegates spoke. His position gave him clear sightlines to all entrances and exits. Perhaps the humans could explain their creature's military specifications, suggested a Nexari tactical officer, all 4 arms moving in exaggerated gestures. We are eager to learn how sleeping and drooling contribute to battlefield effectiveness. The room erupted in various forms of alien laughter, clicking, hissing, buzzing, and harmonic humming that made Minho's teeth ache. General Sektar stood up, his massive form casting a shadow over Minho's table. In the Keth military, we eliminate inefficiencies. Perhaps your species would benefit from learning proper resource management. Every soldier serves a purpose, Minho replied carefully. Yes, but what purpose does this one serve? Sektar gestured dismissively at Bori. Entertainment? Emotional comfort. Surely trained warriors do not require such psychological crutches. Hye-jin watched as Bori's eyes opened just slightly. Not enough for the aliens to notice, but enough to scan the room quickly before closing again. His tail gave the smallest possible twitch, so brief she almost missed it. The mockery reached new heights when Commander Zekth suggested they should award Bori a medal for outstanding achievement in advanced sleeping techniques. The entire room dissolved into laughter at this, with even the previously respectful delegates joining in. Through it all, Bori continued his apparent nap, giving no sign that he was aware of the discussion, but Hye-jin noticed his ears constantly, moving, tracking conversations, footsteps and mechanical sounds throughout the station. Whatever else he was doing, sleeping wasn't it. The piercing wail of the station's emergency alarm cut through the afternoon session like a knife. Captain Han Minho was in the middle of explaining Earth's defensive capabilities when the sound hit, so loud and urgent that several delegates immediately covered their ears or equivalent sensory organs. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the conference room, casting everything in an eerie crimson glow. The holographic displays that had been showing peaceful trade agreements suddenly switched to tactical readouts and emergency protocols. "Attention all personnel," came the mechanical voice over the intercom system. "This is not a drill. Hostile forces have breached sections 7 through 12. All delegates are to proceed to emergency shelters immediately." The reaction was instant chaos. Chair legs scraped against metal floors as alien delegates jumped to their feet. The tall Nexari began clicking rapidly in their own language, their forearms waving in what looked like panic. The Keith delegates hissed and formed a tight defensive circle, their military training kicking in automatically. Minho felt his heart skip a beat. In all his years of military service, he had never been in a situation quite like this. A diplomatic station under attack was every security officer's nightmare. These weren't soldiers here. They were politicians, scientists, and diplomats who had never expected to face real danger. Through the reinforced windows, he could see small explosions lighting up the darkness of space like deadly fireworks. Whatever was attacking the station had serious firepower. "How did they get through the defenses?" shouted Dr. Lee Dongmin, his usually calm voice cracking with stress. The scientist was staring at a wall display that showed the station's defensive, grid failing section by section. General Sektar, the Keith military advisor who had been mocking Bori just minutes earlier, was now barking orders into his communication device. But even his confident demeanor seemed shaken. "Our sensors show unknown energy signatures," he hissed. "Their shielding technology is unlike anything in our databases." The station shuddered violently, throwing several delegates to the floor. Emergency lighting flickered on and off, and somewhere, in the distance, Minho could hear the sound of metal tearing. Never a good sign on a space station. Ambassador Yoon So-young was trying to maintain order, her voice cutting through the panic. "Everyone please remain calm and follow emergency procedures. Station security will handle the situation. But even as she spoke, her eyes showed doubt. Through the chaos, Minho could hear radio chatter from the security forces. The words coming through weren't encouraging. Heavy casualties in Section 9, unknown weapons technology, shields failing. Engineer Song Hee-jin was frantically working at her portable computer, trying to access the station's defensive systems. "I'm reading massive energy spikes," she called out. "Whatever they're using to punch through the hull, it's incredibly advanced." The Vex commander's wings were buzzing frantically as it tried to coordinate with its own people. "Our military vessels are responding, but they report difficulty targeting the attackers. Some form of adaptive camouflage." Another violent shake ran through the station, stronger this time. The lights went out completely for several seconds before the emergency power kicked in. In that brief darkness, Minho heard something that made his blood run cold. The distant sound of weapons fire, much closer than it should have been. "They're inside the station," he said grimly. As if to confirm his words, a new announcement crackled over the intercom. "Security alert. Hostile forces detected in residential sectors. All personnel maintain lockdown positions. Do not attempt to evacuate." The alien delegates looked at each other with growing fear. These were species that had known peace for generations. Most had never seen real combat, and their advanced civilizations had made war almost obsolete. They weren't prepared for this kind of raw, violent threat. In the midst of all this chaos, one figure remained completely calm. Bori had risen to his feet at the first sound of the alarm, but he wasn't panicking like everyone else. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. His entire posture had changed. The sleepy, lazy dog from moments before was gone, replaced by something alert and focused. His ears were pricked forward, his muscles tense, and his eyes, those brown eyes that had seemed so harmless, now held an intensity that none of the aliens had ever noticed before. But they were all too busy panicking to see the transformation happening right in front of them. The change in Bori happened so quickly that at first none of the panicking aliens noticed. One moment he was standing calmly while chaos erupted around him, and the next moment he was something entirely different. His spine straightened, transforming his entire silhouette from a friendly house dog into something that looked more like a wolf. His head lifted, ears standing at full attention as they swiveled to catch sounds that the station's sensors couldn't detect. His brown eyes, which had seemed so sleepy and gentle for the past 2 days, now held a sharp focus that seemed to cut through the emergency lighting. Commander Park Jin-woo appeared in the doorway of the conference room, moving with the quick, efficient steps of someone who had dealt with crises before. He took in the scene at a glance, alien delegates pressed against walls, emergency lights flashing, the sound of distant explosions getting closer. His eyes found Bori immediately, and something passed between them. Not words, not even an obvious gesture, but a communication so subtle that most people would have missed it entirely. Park's right hand moved slightly, fingers forming a shape that lasted less than a second. That tiny signal changed everything. Bori's casual, pet-like movements vanished completely. His muscles coiled like springs ready to release. His breathing shifted from the relaxed panting of a house dog to the controlled, efficient pattern of a predator preparing for action. Even the way he held his tail changed, dropping low and still. Instead of its usual friendly wag, the transformation was so dramatic that General Sektar, the Keth military advisor, who had been barking orders into his communicator, suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His yellow reptilian eyes fixed on Bori, with a confusion that quickly shifted to something that looked almost like recognition. "What?" Sektar began, then seemed to lose his words. Dr. Lee Dong-min, who had been frantically trying to access station schematics on his portable device, looked up at the sudden silence from the Keith general. His eyes followed Sektar's gaze to Bori, and his mouth fell open slightly. The dog they had all been mocking for 2 days was gone. In his place stood something that moved with the fluid grace of a natural-born killer. Every step was placed with precision, every movement calculated and purposeful. His head swept the room in systematic arcs, not the random looking around of a curious pet, but the methodical scanning of a security professional assessing threats and exits. Ambassador Yoon So-young, who had been trying to maintain diplomatic calm despite the crisis, felt her carefully controlled expression slip as she watched Bori move. The way he positioned himself in the room wasn't random. He had chosen a spot that gave him clear sightlines to all entrances while keeping his back protected. It was textbook tactical positioning. "How long has it been able to do that?" whispered Commander Zeketh, the Vex military representative. Its compound eyes tracked Bori's movements with the fascination of someone watching a magic trick they couldn't figure out. Engineer Song Hye-jin, who had noticed Bori's subtle alertness before, now saw the full picture. "He's been doing it the whole time," she said softly. "We just didn't recognize what we were looking at." The alien chatter that had filled the room moments before died away completely. Even the emergency alarms seemed quieter somehow, though they continued their urgent wailing. Every delegate in the room was now focused on the small Earth creature they had dismissed as useless. Bori's nostrils flared as he tested the air, his enhanced senses picking up information that the station's sophisticated sensors couldn't detect. His ears twitched as he isolated specific sounds from the chaos. Footsteps that didn't belong, weapons being prepared, the particular frequency of fear that came from cornered predators. Park moved to join his partner, and their coordination was seamless. No words were exchanged, but Bori shifted position slightly to cover Park's blind spot, while the human began checking his equipment. The aliens watched this silent communication with growing amazement. They were witnessing a partnership that had been forged over thousands of years of evolution, refined through countless generations of cooperation between two species that had chosen to become stronger together. General Sektar's scarred snout opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. "It's not a pet," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a soldier." Commander Park Jin-woo knelt beside Bori and whispered something so quietly that even the sensitive alien hearing couldn't pick it up. The dog's ears flicked once in acknowledgement, and then he was moving toward the conference room's maintenance panel with a purpose that made every alien delegate hold their breath. What happened next defied everything they thought they knew about Earth creatures. Bori didn't just walk to the wall, he flowed like water, each step placed so carefully that his claws made no sound on the metal flooring. When Park opened the maintenance access panel, Bori slipped inside the opening, as if he had done it 1,000 times before. The ventilation system of Galactic Station Delta 9 was a maze of metal tunnels, air ducts, and service corridors that even the station's engineers rarely entered. It was dark, cramped, and filled with the constant noise of recycling systems and environmental controls. For most creatures, it would be a confusing, impossible place to navigate. For Bori, it was a highway. His enhanced hearing picked out every sound echoing through the metal passages, the heavy footsteps of the raiders moving through the main corridors below, the rapid breathing of frightened station personnel hiding in their quarters, the electronic hum of alien weapons charging for another attack. Each sound painted a picture, in his mind, of exactly where everyone was located. Through the conference room's wall monitors, the alien delegates could track Bori's progress using the station's internal sensors. What they saw left them speechless. The dog moved through the narrow passages, with impossible grace, never hesitating at intersections, never taking a wrong turn. It was as if he had memorized the entire station's layout in just 2 days. "How does it know where to go?" whispered Dr. Lee Dong-min, staring at the display that showed Bori's heat signature moving through areas that weren't even on the official station maps. Engineer Song Hye-jin was furiously typing at her console, trying to understand what she was seeing. "He's using service tunnels that most of our people don't even know exist. Look at this route. He's taking a path that will bring him up behind the raiders in Section 12. General Sektar's scaled fingers gripped his communicator so tightly it creaked. "Impossible. Our best warriors would be lost in those passages within minutes, but Bori wasn't lost. His nose told him stories that no technological sensor could match. The metallic tang of alien weapons, the acrid smell of fear sweat. From the raiders, the ozone scent that lingered where energy weapons had been fired. Each scent trail led him exactly where he needed to go. In Section 12, 3 raiders were systematically destroying the station's communication equipment. They wore advanced armor that made them invisible to most sensors, and their weapons could punch through the station's reinforced walls like paper. They had every advantage that technology could provide. They never heard Bori coming. His first raider was checking his scanner when something moved in his peripheral vision. By the time he turned to look, Bori was already in motion. The dog's training kicked in with lethal efficiency, a precise strike that disabled the raiders. Weapon arm, followed by moves that left the attacker unconscious but alive. The second raider spun around at his partner's strangled cry, but saw nothing. Bori had already melted back into the shadows between the equipment racks. The raider's enhanced vision scanned frantically, but he was looking for threats at his own eye level, not for a four-legged opponent who moved like liquid darkness near the floor. When Bori struck again, it was from an angle the raider never expected. Swift, silent, and completely effective, the third raider realized something was wrong when his teammates stopped responding to his radio calls. He activated every sensor his armor possessed, flooding the area with scanning beams and detection pulses. But Bori had already adapted, using the raider's own equipment against him, staying in the blind spots created by the sensor interference. Back in the conference room, the alien delegates watched in stunned silence as the station's security displays showed the raiders in Section 12 going offline one by one. No explosions, no energy weapon discharges, no signs of a firefight. Just silence spreading through areas that had been full of hostile activity moments before. "It's hunting them," breathed Commander Zeketh, its compound eyes reflecting the monitor's glow. "Not fighting, hunting." Ambassador Yoon So-young felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a well-trained animal following commands. This was an apex predator, doing what millions of years of evolution had designed him to do, enhanced by generations of partnership with humans who had refined those instincts into something even more formidable. The mockery of the past 2 days seemed like a distant memory now. The remaining raiders had regrouped in the station's central hub, a strategic position that gave them control over the main power systems and life support. Their leader, a heavily armored figure with glowing red sensors, was barking orders through encrypted communications, while his team set up defensive positions. "Perimeter secured," one raider reported. "No way anyone can approach without triggering our motion sensors." They had no idea they were already being hunted. Commander Park Jin-woo crouched in a maintenance corridor 3 levels below, speaking quietly into his communicator with the station's human security chief. "Bori's in position," he whispered. "Give us 2 minutes, then start your approach from the north corridor." Through the conference room's monitoring systems, the alien delegates could see both perspectives of what was about to unfold. On one screen, the raiders confidently held their position, their advanced weapons trained on the obvious approach routes. On another screen, a small heat signature moved through spaces so narrow that the raiders' bulky armor could never fit. Captain Han Min-ho watched the tactical display with professional interest, but even his military training hadn't prepared him for what he was seeing. "He's not just moving randomly," he explained to the mesmerized aliens. "Look at the pattern. Every position he takes drives the raiders toward that central choke point." Bori emerged from a ventilation grate behind the raiders' position, but instead of attacking immediately, he did something that made General Sektar's jaw drop open. The dog deliberately triggered one of the raiders' motion sensors, just enough to get their attention without revealing his exact location. "Contact rear position," shouted one of the raiders, spinning around with his weapon raised, but Bori was already gone, melted back into the shadows like he had never been there at all. The raiders fired several shots at empty air, their energy weapons lighting up the darkened corridor but hitting nothing. "False alarm," the leader growled, "probably just debris from the damaged sections." What the raiders didn't realize was that Bori had deliberately drawn their attention away from the human security team's approach. While they were focused on the rear sensors, Park and his team moved into position at the main access points. Engineer Song Haye-jin was frantically taking notes as she watched. "This isn't random tactics," she muttered. "He's using psychological warfare, making them nervous, forcing them to waste ammunition, disrupting their communication patterns." The next phase was even more impressive. Bori began a careful sequence. of movements that seemed almost like a deadly dance. He would appear briefly in one location, just long enough to draw the raiders' attention and fire, then vanish before they could target him properly. Each appearance forced the raiders to shift their defensive positions slightly. Dr. Lee Dong-min suddenly understood what he was seeing. "He's herding them," he said in amazement. "Like sheepdogs herd livestock, but in reverse. He's pushing them. Exactly where he wants them to go." The raiders, growing increasingly frustrated and trigger-happy, began abandoning their carefully planned defensive positions to chase what seemed like random contacts. Their leader tried to maintain discipline, but the psychological pressure of an invisible enemy was breaking down their unit cohesion. "Unknown contacts in ventilation systems," one raider reported, his voice tight with stress. "Possible multiple infiltrators." "Hold positions," their leader commanded, but it was too late. His team was already scattered, each trying to cover multiple approach routes against an enemy they couldn't see or predict. That's when Park's security team struck. The coordination was flawless. As the human security forces engaged from the main corridors, Bori appeared from impossible angles to cut off escape routes. The raiders found themselves trapped in a web they hadn't even seen being built around them. But the most impressive part wasn't the tactics, it was the communication. Park and Bori worked together without any visible signals, each seeming to know instinctively what the other would do next. When Park needed a distraction, Bori created one. When Bori needed support, Park was already in position. Ambassador Yoon, So Young watched a raider raise his weapon toward one of the human security officers, only to have Bori appear from nowhere, to knock the weapon aside with perfect timing. No radio calls, no hand signals, just two species working as one unit with a precision that seemed almost telepathic. "Impossible," whispered Commander Zekth. "No military unit achieves that level of coordination without extensive technological integration." "They don't need technology," Captain Minho realized. "They've been integrating for thousands of years. This isn't training, it's evolution." The final raider surrender came within minutes. Faced with an enemy they couldn't see, predict, or counter, the remaining attackers threw down their weapons and activated their emergency beacons. The threat that had overwhelmed the station's advanced alien security systems had been neutralized by a partnership that the aliens had dismissed as primitive. In the sudden silence that followed, every alien delegate stared at their monitors in stunned disbelief. The emergency alarms finally stopped wailing, leaving behind a silence that felt almost unnatural after hours of chaos. Red warning lights faded to soft white, and the holographic displays slowly returned to their normal diplomatic functions. The crisis was over, but nobody in the conference room seemed able to process what they had just witnessed. Commander Park Jin-woo emerged from the maintenance corridor, brushing dust from his uniform. Behind him, Bori trotted casually into the room, his tongue hanging out slightly as he panted from his exertions. To anyone who hadn't seen the tactical displays, he looked exactly like the sleepy pet dog they had been mocking for 2 days. But everything had changed. Bori padded over to his usual spot near Park's chair and settled down with a contented sigh. His tail gave a few lazy wags as he made himself comfortable, and within moments he appeared to be dozing again. The transformation back to harmless pet was so complete that it seemed impossible he had just single-handedly helped neutralize a heavily armed raider team. The alien delegates stood frozen, their various forms of communication clicking, hissing, buzzing, humming, completely silent for the first time since the summit began. They stared at Bori as if seeing him for the very first time, which in many ways they were. General Sektar, the Keth military advisor who had led much of the mockery, took a hesitant step forward. His scaled hands trembled slightly as he pointed at Bori. "That creature," he began, then stopped, unable to find words in any language. Dr. Lee Dong-min was still staring at his tactical display, watching the replay of Bori's movements through the station's corridors. "The precision," he whispered to himself, "the tactical awareness. How did we miss it?" Engineer Song Hye-jin had been quiet for several minutes, reviewing sensor data and trying to understand what her instruments had recorded. "We didn't miss it," she said slowly. "We just didn't know how to recognize it. Every behavior we saw as pet-like was actually sophisticated intelligence gathering." The Nexari ambassador, who had made some of the cruelest jokes about human parasites, approached Park with movements so careful they seemed almost reverent. All four of its arms hung at its sides, and its usual confident posture had been replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "Human delegate," it said, its voice barely above a whisper. We have made a grave error in judgment." Park looked up from checking his equipment, one hand absently stroking Bori's head. "How so, Ambassador?" The Nexari's four eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep emotional distress in their species. "We believed your companion was inefficient. A burden we could not see." "What you were really looking at," Park finished gently. "How long?" asked Commander Zeketh, its compound eyes reflecting the soft lighting as it stared at Bori. "How long have humans maintained this partnership?" Park scratched behind Bori's ears, and the dog's tail thumped once against the floor. "About 30,000 years, give or take, though the partnership became truly refined in the last 10,000. The number hit the alien delegates like a physical blow. 30,000 years of cooperative evolution, longer than some of their civilizations had existed, longer than they had been traveling between stars. Ambassador Yoon So-young, who had endured 2 days of insults about human primitiveness, spoke with quiet dignity. "Bori isn't our pet. He's our partner. His species chose to evolve alongside ours, and we chose to evolve alongside his. We became something greater together than either could be alone." General Sektar's military bearing crumbled completely. "We called them useless. We mocked their bond. He trailed off, looking at Bori with new eyes. "We couldn't recognize a perfect military partnership because it was so advanced it appeared primitive to us." The Vex commander's wings drooped with what might have been embarrassment. "Your pet demonstrated tactical capabilities that exceed our finest military algorithms. The coordination between you and the creature. We have never seen anything like it." Dr. Lee Dongmin was shaking his head in amazement. "No technology, no implants, no artificial enhancement. Just pure evolutionary cooperation refined over millennia." Bori, completely unbothered by all the attention, rolled onto his side for a more comfortable nap position. His movement sent a ripple of respectful silence through the room, as if the aliens were afraid to disturb him. The young Nexari scientist who had suggested Bori might be a mind-controlling parasite couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "We thought we were the advanced ones," it said quietly. "We thought our technology made us superior." "Different paths," Park said simply. "We chose cooperation over domination, partnership over control. It took longer, but it got us here." The conference room remained silent for a long time after that. Outside the windows, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the profound shift in understanding that had just taken place among the assembled species. When the delegates finally began to speak again, their voices carried a new tone, one of respect, wonder, and perhaps a little envy for a bond they were only beginning to comprehend.